It's been a while since the last video in this series. In the months since I made part 3 of this series, there have been a number of major developments which I would like to go over before I resume my response to MATN. The first and foremost major development since the last video is that H-Bomber Guy finally released his own response to MATN. Sort of. It wasn't quite the response I had envisioned or hoped for, yet it is a response nonetheless. The video I am talking about is H-Bomb's New Vegas is genius, and here's why. In this video, H-Bomb never mentions MATN directly, but he systematically dismantles many of MATN's false claims and slander against New Vegas. It may be for the best that H-Bomb never directly mentioned MATN because, frankly, MATN doesn't deserve to be dignified by being mentioned by name. But, though it is undeserved, it is hard to ignore a video when it has over 6 million views. As for H-Bomb's New Vegas is genius and here's why video, he was essentially preaching to the choir as far as I am concerned. There's not a whole lot in it that I didn't already know or agree with already. But I just want everyone to take a look at the title of H-Bomb's video and consider that this video is a response to MATN's Fallout 3 is better than you think. Let this sink in for a moment. MATN made a video ostensibly to praise Fallout 3. That is how he titled it, but he then pulled a bait and switch where instead of defending Fallout 3, he actually spends the majority of his video shitting on New Vegas.
And I'm sorry, but we didn't need any of that information. That is just a massive exposition dump. That is pure telling, not showing. And I'm utterly baffled that managed to make it into the final game, because we don't need any of it.
And so, when H-Bomb made a response to this, his video, which refutes MATN's arguments, is a video which defends New Vegas. Can anyone prop up Fallout 3 without dunking on or slandering New Vegas? Apparently not, because after all of these years, no one has yet done it. H-Bomb's original Fallout 3 is garbage, and here's why, still stands as a valid critique of a very flawed game. MATN's hatchet job on New Vegas did not in any way invalidate anything H-Bomb said in that video, and the massive dislike ratio by butthurt Bethesdards also does nothing to alter the facts that the game is just shit and no one can refute that. If you can prove otherwise, then do it. Since 2008, no one has made a proper defense of Fallout 3. Either shit or get off the pot.
Who's laughing now?
H-Bomb says that New Vegas is the best game of all time, and that is something I agree with wholeheartedly. I can't even think of a game that is a close second. For the last decade since it came out, I've been hoping for a game that is on par with the greatness of New Vegas to appear, but so far none has, and I place much of the blame for this on Bethesdard shills who have made it their mission to brainwash their viewers into believing that terrible Bethesda games like Fallout 3, 4, and 76 are somehow equal to New Vegas. Their videos get millions of views. Bethesda sees that, and as a result, they have zero incentive to change or improve. Bethesda shills say they're doing a hell of a job, and anyone who criticizes is toxic. And that's why another New Vegas has never been made, because these Bethesda shills are doing their damnedest to defend mediocre shitware games, so that's all we get, and it's their fault. But why is New Vegas so much greater than these shitware games? A lot of it comes down to politics, and H-Bomb covered this somewhat in his video. A lot of people will tell you they don't want politics in their video games. When it comes to politics in video games, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. When many game developers go about incorporating politics into their games, they often frame things through their own personal biases or are compelled to frame it through a lens of political correctness. And when players say they don't want politics in their games, this is the sort of games they are referring to. For the most part, people do not want to be preached to and told how to think or what is right or wrong in no uncertain terms. Fallout has always been a game about politics. When you look up the word fallout in the dictionary, you see that the word has multiple meanings. The first definition is the event of small airborne particles falling to the ground in significant quantities as a result of major industrial activity, volcano eruption, sandstorm, nuclear explosion, etc., or the particles themselves. There is a video on YouTube titled Bethesda Never Understood Fallout, which covers Bethesda's understanding, or lack thereof, of Fallout. Bethesda's understanding of Fallout is basically limited to the first definition of what Fallout means. Todd and Emil see the Fallout franchise as being this looter-shooter where you go around in power armor with energy weapons and blasting ghouls and mutants, and there's radiation everywhere, and you drink Nuka-Cola and everything is glowing and mutated because a nuclear apocalypse happened. And even though 200 years have passed, this world and everyone in it revolves around the nuclear apocalypse, and there's nothing more to this world than that. Bethesda's Fallouts are basically post-apocalyptic amusement parks. Hell, they even made one of the Fallout 4 DLCs being set in a Nuka-Cola amusement park. This is Bethesda's understanding of Fallout. Nothing more, nothing less. But what if I told you that the word Fallout has another meaning besides radioactive particles? The third definition is a negative side effect, an undesirable or unexpected consequence. The sheer genius of Tim Kaine and the rest of the team that created the Fallout franchise in selecting the name that they did is that the name Fallout works on so many levels. Yes, you have that superficial nuclear radioactive particles type of fallout on the surface, but on a deeper level, the word fallout can refer to the political side of Fallout. When Todd and Emil took over the Fallout franchise, they only focused on the aesthetic. When Harry S. Truman made the decision to drop atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was the fallout of nuclear particles. But in addition to that, there was also the fallout, the negative consequences or blowback that came from this decision, which are still hotly debated to this day. You can have fallout without any sort of nuclear radioactivity involved. For example, there was enormous fallout when Yugoslav nationalist Gavrilo Princip assassinated Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. Franz Ferdinand's uncle, Franz Joseph I, was not too happy with this course of events. This resulted in the fallout of the First World War, in which millions died. There was no radioactivity, atom bombs, or ghouls in World War I, but there were other horrors such as landmines, machine guns, and mustard gas. This non-nuclear fallout was still a fallout by definition. Gavrilo Princip killed an Austrian with a funny-looking mustache and ignited a world war. The fallout from this eventually led to another Austrian with a funny-looking mustache named Adolf Hitler starting another world war. Estimates vary, but when you combine the death tolls of both world wars, it was all told about 80 million people killed. Not a bad kill-death ratio for an impoverished, emaciated teen. That's why I say, what a good shot, man. Unlike Benny.
What in the goddamn...
Speaking of Hitler, he is mentioned in Ron Perlman's intro narration of the very first game, where the point is made that war never changes.
War never changes. The Romans waged war to gather slaves and wealth. Spain built an empire from its lust for gold and territory. Hitler shaped a battered Germany into an economic superpower. But war never changes.
War is the health of the state. In the 20th century, millions were murdered by the state. In the 21st century, at least in the Fallout timeline, this figure rises to billions. Those who bring about wars and their reasons may not have changed, but the scale has increased, and this time it was so thorough in its destruction that it managed to wipe the slate clean on human civilization. The very first time I played New Vegas, I was congratulated by General MacArthur for a job well done. Little did he know that I was working with Mr. House, and he was now surrounded by an army of Securitrons.
What is this Brahmin shit? I'm not getting the feeling we're all about to sing Kumbaya here.
One of the proudest moments for me in any video game was forcing the NCR to abandon their attempted onslaught of the Mojave and agree to the terms of a new treaty that guaranteed the independence of New Vegas. It was my choice to side with Mr. House, and I'd gladly do it all over again. Fallout 3 never gave me anything close to that level of satisfaction. Fallout 3 never even gave me any choice. Mr. House praised me as one of the best employees he ever had. Fallout 3, on the other hand, told me to kill myself. Even if Fallout 3 did give you a choice on which faction to support, the game does a poor job of telling you what the motives and goals are. We know the Brotherhood of Steel and Enclave both want that water purifier, apparently so they can attach their name to it and use it as leverage to control the Capital Wasteland. The difference between the water purifier in Fallout 3 and Hoover Dam in New Vegas is that in Fallout 3, the water purifier is the end-all, be-all. In contrast, Hoover Dam is merely a means to an end. It is not the end itself. Talk to Mr. House and he will tell you what his vision is.
New Vegas is more than a city. It's the remedy to mankind's derailment. The city's economy is a blast furnace in which can be forged the steel of a new rail line running straight to a new horizon. What is the NCR? A society of people desperate to experience comfort, ease, luxury. A society of customers. With all that money pouring in, give me 20 years and I'll reignite the high technology development sectors. 50 years and I'll have people in orbit. 100 years and my colony ships will be heading for the stars to search for planets unpolluted by the wrath and folly of a bygone generation.
Same goes for Caesar or the NCR. You can learn and understand the goals, motivations, philosophies, and politics of these disparate factions, but you don't get that in Fallout 3.
You again.
The two Fallout 3 factions just want the water purifier, and apparently Bethesda never took the time to think of anything beyond that. Just lazy, terrible writing. Fallout 3 is set 200 years after the slate had been wiped clean by a nuclear apocalypse, and apparently no progress has been made during the intervening years. This is a point I've already covered in a previous video, but I bring it up again because I want to talk about that in a purely political context. The very same governments which started the war were also wiped out by it, and the wasteland that was left in the wake of that apocalypse became a political vacuum in which new political entities began to emerge from the ashes. The exception, of course, is the Enclave, which are the actual remnants of the pre-war American government.
They're the American government! The Eagle! People comma we the more perfect union!
But the Enclave have become, as their name suggests, reduced to a mere enclave amidst the barren wasteland. 200 years is a long time on human timescales. To put that into perspective, 200 years ago from our present was roughly the time of the Napoleonic Wars. You might think World War I was a long time ago, but the Napoleonic Wars was to World War I what World War I is to us. Think about how much the world has changed since the time of Napoleon. And yet, in Bethesda's Fallouts, nothing ever changes. Why is it that nothing ever changes? We can blame that, in part, on Bethesda being lazy or incompetent, and I believe that is true, but I also think there's a little more to it than that. You see, the post-apocalyptic genre of fiction is a popular fiction genre. Other popular examples include the Wild West genre or science fiction. The Fallout series, to some extent, incorporates elements of the Wild West and science fiction genre into itself, along with post-apocalyptic. This is especially true with the West Coast Fallouts, which are set in the West, so it makes sense that there is some Western vibes. Bethesda, in copying and pasting from the original Fallouts, also incorporated some Wild West vibes.
Name's Lucas Sims, town sheriff, and mayor too, when the need arises.
But it comes across as very contrived, being on the East Coast. So you have these three fiction genres: post-apocalyptic, Wild West, and science fiction. One core element these genres share in common is the lack of regimentation in their setting. In all of these settings, there is liberty, which comes from the fact that there is an absence of state authority telling you what to do and what not to do. Though Fallout 3 has a post-apocalyptic aesthetic, the accompanying liberty that should come from an absence of authority is not there, because Bethesda added in authority in the form of your dad, and all the others who tell you what to do from beginning to end. It is a superficial wasteland game, but without the accompanying liberty that a wasteland should have. If you've ever watched Star Trek, you know that space is the final frontier. Gene Roddenberry envisioned it as something akin to a Western, but set in space. In fact, the original title of his series was Wagon Train to the Stars. Years later, other series, like Firefly, doubled down on the idea of a Western set in space. New Vegas is a Western set in the post-apocalypse. One of my favorite TV series from the early 2000s was Deadwood. It was a Western series set in the town of Deadwood in the Black Hills during the late 1800s. By the way, if you want to know more about the history of the Black Hills, check out my video titled The White Ghost of the Black Hills. The Deadwood TV series lasted for 3 seasons. The first 2 were really good, but as with the case of Fallout, the third one was really, really bad. And the reason why it started out great and went into a steep decline is what I would attribute to the arrival of Leviathan, i.e. the state.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
We aren't some motley band of vault alchemists. We're with the government, for goodness sake. Have a little faith in us.
Once the government comes in and begins regimenting things, it isn't the Wild West anymore. So what's the fun in that? No one wants to live in a gulag. The Fallout franchise faces a dichotomy where, on one hand, to maintain the post-apocalyptic wasteland setting, civilization cannot develop or advance. The game must remain locked in that post-apocalyptic theme park forever. And yet, on the other hand, it makes no logical sense for this progress to not happen after hundreds of years. It is not logical, but it can be handled far better than the way Bethesda has done. Seamus Young made an excellent point in his Bethesda Never Understood Fallout video about those big-headed aliens that were the main antagonists on the pilot episode of Star Trek. They appear in that one episode, but they are never seen again. But, in contrast, if Bethesda owned the Star Trek franchise, those big-headed aliens would have been the antagonists in every episode and on every planet, because it just wouldn't be a proper Star Trek without them, right? That's what we see in Bethesda's Fallout games, where they have become formulaic. In every game, you can expect the Brotherhood of Steel, ghouls, super mutants, and all that same old stuff to appear time and time again. Every Bethesda Fallout to date has featured the Brotherhood of Steel in power armor on every single cover. Who can say when they'll make Fallout 5, but when they do, you can bet the cover art is going to be some Brotherhood of Steel dude in power armor, because that's all Fallout is, right? Nothing ever changes. Except in the Black Isle and Obsidian Fallouts, where things are constantly evolving. Characters come and go, and factions wax and wane over time. In the original Fallout, the Brotherhood of Steel were the big kids on the playground, and the only ones powerful enough to stand up to the Master and his army of super mutants. But by the time of Fallout 2, you see a loading screen image of a tribal wearing a desecrated Brotherhood of Steel helmet, which shows the Brotherhood of Steel have failed as a faction, and then, by the time of New Vegas, they're nearly completely wiped out. In contrast, this tiny, insignificant town named Shady Sands grew into the NCR, and curb-stomped the Brotherhood of Steel out of California. The Master and his army were defeated in the first game, and did not return as the chief antagonists in the second game. This time, it was an entirely new faction, the Enclave. By the time of New Vegas, the Enclave were reduced to a few elderly remnants, in an even more pathetic state than the Brotherhood of Steel. And in their place, there was now Caesar's Legion, Mr. House, and the NCR. Any of those can be the chief antagonists, depending what your perspective is. And that, in a nutshell, is what I mean when I refer to the politics of Fallout. To those of you who are fans of Fallout, but say you don't like politics, I say to you, do you not understand that Fallout is a very political game? Take a moment from looting and shooting and think about what is going on in the world around you. It is politics. Unless, of course, you're playing a Bethesda Fallout, in which case shooting and looting really is all there is to it. And that pretty much covers the first thing I wanted to talk about, which is my thoughts regarding H-Bomb's video. That is the first major development since my last video. The next major earth-shattering development I want to discuss is Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda. This changes everything. Probably. A few years ago, Chris Avellone tweeted that he didn't think Obsidian would work on Fallout again.
He left Obsidian, and he's made some comments in the past about how he thinks it's unlikely that Obsidian will ever get their hands on the Fallout IP again to create another Fallout game, New Vegas 2, another separate spin-off, etc. In fact, he tweeted out the following in relation to a discussion on Fallout New Vegas, where he said, "Oh, it'll be fine, but I don't think Fallout will go beyond Bethesda again, and certainly not to Obsidian." So not only is he saying that it's unlikely Fallout will ever be developed by a development studio aside from Bethesda, Bethesda, he also thinks it's even more unlikely that if it does happen to go outside of Bethesda, that developer would be Obsidian Entertainment.
If you didn't know, Chris Avellone was an employee of Obsidian, but he left some years ago and has made a number of unsubstantiated accusations against Obsidian's management. I don't know how true any of Chris Avellone's allegations are, but what I do know is that he was very bitter towards the studio, which led him to post anti-Obsidian tweets such as this and a number of others over the years. But regardless of the validity of Chris Avellone's allegations, some YouTubers at the time, such as Mrmattyplays and Lone Vault Wanderer, seem to think Chris Avellone is some sort of infallible deity, and anything he says is law. This view can easily be debunked by the fact that Mr. Avellone has been accused by multiple women of sexual misconduct. The fact that he has apologized to these women would suggest that there is some truth to these accusations. It is commendable that he apologized for what he's done, but nevertheless, he has done wrong, and therefore he is not infallible. So, was Mrmattyplays, Lone Vault Wanderer, and anyone else who kissed the ground Chris Avellone walked on wrong for the faith they placed in this man? I personally think so. These Chris Avellone worshippers are the ones who have perpetuated the myth that Obsidian was a dead studio because Chris Avellone, according to them, was the sole talent behind New Vegas, and thus, when he left, that meant that all talent had left Obsidian. That, of course, is not true, but this is the big lie which Matty and others have spread throughout the community. They have talked to Chris Avellone, and he's led them to believe this, but it's obviously a very biased source. A couple years ago, I made a video calling out TKS Mantis for slandering Chris Avellone because in an old video, Mantis said that Chris Avellone was greasy.
And I'm not a big fan of Chris Avellone personally. I think he's mousy looking, and he comes off weird in interviews. He looks greasy, things like that. Like, he's just off-putting to me as a person.
Of course, this video was meant as a joke, and I wasn't deliberately trying to insult Mantis or anything, but nevertheless, he did call Chris Avellone greasy. Of course, this was long before the sexual allegations came out regarding Chris Avellone. In hindsight, I just want to say that maybe Mantis was right all along. Maybe Chris Avellone really is greasy. I don't know if Chris Avellone will ever return to Obsidian, but with the sexual assault accusations, does anyone even want him back? He's a talented writer, but he's not the only talented writer in the world, or at the studio. They frankly don't need him, so I don't lose any sleep over it because I don't consider him to be the end-all, be-all of Fallout. I don't think even Matty or Lone Vault Wanderer think that way anymore, but they did at this time. And then, sometime later, Todd Howard did an interview where he seemed to confirm what Chris Avellone had said by stating also that another Obsidian Fallout was unlikely. And this seemed to be the final nail in the coffin, and that put matters to rest for a few years. But then, out of the blue, Microsoft went and bought Bethesda, which puts them under the same umbrella as Obsidian. No matter how bitter or jealous Chris Avellone and Todd Howard may be, it is not within their purview whether another Obsidian Fallout is made. Microsoft owns both studios and all associated intellectual properties of each studio, so an Obsidian Fallout can happen, and I would say it is in fact very likely to happen. We know for a fact that Bethesda has their hands full with Starfield at the moment, and after that, they're going to spend the next 4 or so years working on the next mainline Elder Scrolls. Assuming they don't work on anything else, there probably wouldn't be a Fallout 5 from Bethesda before 2030 or so. That's a hell of a long time. And considering how terrible Fallout 4 and 76 were, do we even want another Bethesda Fallout anyway? I sure don't. But there's no denying these mediocre shitware Bethesda games sell in the millions like hotcakes. So, from a purely money perspective, it would make sense for Microsoft to authorize and finance a Fallout 5 made by Todd and Emil. I don't want to see it, but it would sell well no matter how terrible it is. But since Bethesda's hands are full for the foreseeable future on Starfield and the Elder Scrolls, we aren't going to see another Fallout anytime soon unless someone other than Bethesda makes it. And who is more qualified to work on Fallout than the very people who created the series in the first place? That would be Obsidian, which is made up of the former team at Black Isle. And while sexual predator Chris Avellone may have left the studio, the most relevant people behind the greatness of New Vegas and the original Fallout still remain, despite the persistent myth that all talent had left. So it is my prediction that another Obsidian Fallout will happen, and you can take that to the bank. Because I've also successfully predicted that Red Dead Redemption 2 would get ported to PC, and it did, much to the dismay and butthurt of console fanboys. Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda is kind of funny when you think about it. For many years, Bethesda seemed like an unstoppable juggernaut. But with the stroke of a pen, they have been reduced to mere vassals of Microsoft. Microsoft themselves may one day collapse or fade. Much like we see in the original Fallouts, things are constantly evolving and changing. The mighty empires of today will be reduced to remnants in the future. New players will come out of nowhere and completely change everything. Even the Roman Empire eventually collapsed. It took a while, but it happened. Change. Change always changes. Another breaking development I wanted to cover, which is closely related to Bethesda's acquisition by Microsoft, is the death of Xenomax CEO Robert A. Altman. The official cause of death is complications from a medical procedure. Bethesda released a statement saying, quote, "We are deeply saddened to tell you of the passing of Robert A. Altman, our founder and CEO. He was a true visionary, friend, and believer in the spirit of people and the power of what they could accomplish together. He was an extraordinary leader and an even better human being." Well, I can tell you right now, it is a lie when they say Robert A. Altman was their founder. Bethesda was actually founded by Christopher Weaver, whom Altman robbed and forced out of the company. According to Wikipedia, Christopher Weaver is still alive. He was not only the founder of Bethesda, but also created the Elder Scrolls franchise. People think Todd Howard created it, but Todd only started to become involved from Morrowind onward. Poor Christopher Weaver doesn't get the credit he deserves. No one knows his name or sings his praises. Wikipedia says he volunteers as an air ambulance pilot. He seems to be a good man who helps people and doesn't ask or receive anything in return. Meanwhile, Altman was a corrupt crook who never helped anyone and only cared about making money. Well, make money he did with the sale of Xenomax to Microsoft for $7.5 billion. I do find the timing of Altman's death to be very strange. He sells the company to Microsoft, and then soon after, it is announced he died during a medical procedure with no details given. I mean, people die every day, so it can happen, but something seems a bit suspicious to me about it, given the timing. But there are so many things in this world that we will never truly know. But one thing which we can truly know is the final item on my list of developments since the previous video. I received this comment implying that I was a liar for not providing proof of the fact that Tim Kaine said he was disappointed with Bethesda's copying and pasting of elements from the West Coast into the East Coast. Fair enough, I should have shown proof for this, but I didn't have it on hand at the time. I tried searching just as he did and couldn't find it, but I can assure you that I am not a liar, and after some further digging, I was able to hunt down the original source where I had heard this. There is actually at least two sources. In one case, Tim said this in an interview with a Fallout fan site called Duck and Cover. While it is true that he said he enjoyed Fallout 3, he said he would have done things differently. But he didn't go into any specifics in this interview. So this is one source. The other and better source I found is in a very old YouTube on Matt Barton's channel. If you don't know who Matt Barton is, he's a YouTuber who talks about RPGs. You can think of Matt Barton as being kind of like a grown-up version of Mrmattyplays, but with real RPGs instead of Bethesda RPGs. Matt and Matty both have the same name, and they even kind of look similar. Maybe Matt Barton is Matty in another 20 years. Matt Barton has been on YouTube since 2006, basically about as long as I have with my original channel, but despite that long time on the platform, he only has about 20,000 subscribers. He is a highly underrated channel. For the life of me, I just can't understand why channels with shitty content get millions of views, but channels such as Matt Barton's, who talks about real RPGs, never get anywhere near the amount of views they deserve. It just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, he has done interviews with very prominent figures in the RPG world, and that includes Tim Kaine. I'm not going to plagiarize his video by showing the entire thing, but I'll give a link and suggest you go watch it on his channel if you are so inclined. But here is an excerpt which should be allowed under fair use.
I don't think I would have used as many of the same elements. I think it was a bit of a stretch to have the mutants out there. FEV was supposed to be, the forced evolutionary virus was supposed to be localized just to Southern California. So it was a bit of a stretch to have that way out on the East Coast. I would have come up with something completely different. I would have just said, it's a post-nuclear world. There's a million stories out there. Let Fallout 1 and 2 be that corner of the world, and we'll make a brand new one for this corner of the world. Now, having said that, I think Fallout Vegas is an interesting idea because it's close enough to the new California Republic that you can do a lot of fun stuff with that, and that makes sense because it's right next door to where Fallout 1 and 2 took place. But I think Fallout 3, they probably should have just taken it off in a different direction a little more.
Imagine if you were a longtime fan of Fallout, and after waiting 10 years from 1998 to 2008 for a third game, you heard there's this new Fallout game, and it's going to be set in the East Coast. You'd be excited to find out what the Fallout universe was like in this new setting, thousands of miles away from where the original Fallouts were set. Well, imagine your disappointment when you find out it's all the same. If the West Coast is super mutants, ghouls, Enclave, Brotherhood of Steel, and so on, and the East Coast is also super mutants, ghouls, Enclave, Brotherhood of Steel, and so on, you can bet they're everywhere, and it's never anything but that. So, if Bethesda announced a Fallout game set in the Australian outback, or in Siberia, at this point you wouldn't be surprised if you find it is full of super mutants, ghouls, Enclave, etc. And that's why Tim Kaine was disappointed in Bethesda's handling of Fallout 3. Now, to be fair, he did also say that he enjoyed Fallout 3. Enjoying a game is not mutually exclusive with being disappointed with it. You can both enjoy something and be disappointed with it. I can agree with that position myself. I've platinumed Fallout 3 on the PS3. I've enjoyed it to some extent, but like Tim Kaine, I'm also very disappointed with it, and there's no contradiction in that. In his Duck and Cover interview, Tim Kaine said that he wrote a design for his own version of Fallout 3. He would not go into any details about it, explaining that, quote, maybe it will get made one day, but as long as I never show it to anyone, I know it will never get made without me. Basically, he doesn't want to reveal his ideas and then risk having those ideas stolen by someone else.
Who's laughing now?
So, he has his own ideas for a Fallout 3, but he keeps that a secret. The great news is that Tim Kaine is back at Obsidian, and Obsidian is owned by Microsoft, who now also owns Bethesda, and therefore also the Fallout IP. Now, do keep in mind that New Vegas was heavily based off Van Buren, which was Josh Sawyer's version of Fallout 3, which Black Isle worked on in the early 2000s, and it never got finished because Interplay went bankrupt and had to sell the IP, and so Josh and company sat on the Van Buren designs for about a decade before they were able to make New Vegas. And it was a great game. And perhaps a big part of the reason why it turned out to be a great game is those ideas were able to develop and improve over time, aged to perfection like a fine wine. Well, the same would also be the case with Tim Kaine's idea of a Fallout 3. That Duck and Cover interview is from over a decade ago, and he may have been sitting on those ideas far longer than that, maybe 20 years. Imagine how much Tim has refined and improved on the ideas over the course of all that time. So you can be sure he is sitting on a gold mine, and now that he is able to, he has probably approached Microsoft with his proposal, and with Bethesda's hands full for the next decade or so with Starfield and the Elder Scrolls, why wouldn't Microsoft greenlight Tim Kaine's Fallout 3? Just think about it. And when it happens, if it happens, just remember you heard it here first. And that basically covers everything I wanted to talk about as far as the major developments since my previous video. And so, without further ado, I will now resume my response to MATN.
But of course we can't discuss the bomb without looking at Power of the Atom, a quest which gets brought up frequently in any discussion about how terrible Fallout 3 is.
It is brought up frequently in any discussion of how terrible Fallout 3 is, any discussion of how awesome Fallout 3 is, and any discussion of Fallout 3 in general. People who hate Fallout 3 bring it up, and people that love Fallout 3 also bring it up. Bethesda are the ones which chose to make this the centerpiece of the game. Marketing materials Bethesda supplied to the media at the time the game released featured it heavily, along with VATS. Should Bethesda have focused so much attention on this bomb and its explosion? From a marketing standpoint, it worked. Michael Bay's movies are commercially successful for a reason, you know.
Boom! Michael Bay explosion!
In H-Bomb's Fallout 3 critique, he points out how Moira happens to survive the blast. She never at any point is seen to leave the town under any circumstances, yet when the bomb is detonated, she just so happens to be gone. How convenient and contrived. H-Bomb posits that the developers had Moira survive so that players wouldn't miss out on her long and varied survival guide quest, which Bethesda undoubtedly invested a lot of time into. But what H-Bomb didn't point out is that the inverse is also true. If you do the equivalent sort of destruction to Tenpenny Tower by siding with the ghouls and allow them to massacre all of the human inhabitants, for some reason Mr. Burke is spared from Roy's anti-human racism. I'll probably come back to Roy and how fucked up the game's morality is for classifying this mass-murdering bigot as a good karma character, according to the game files. But for now, my point is that the game goes to unreasonable lengths to keep Mr. Burke alive, so that players won't get locked out of the quest to blow up Megaton. Roy Phillips' hatred of humans extends beyond Tenpenny. He is no different than Alistair Tenpenny in his desire to see the people of Megaton murdered by the bomb's detonation. So, change in ownership at Tenpenny Tower changes nothing as far as the power of the atom is concerned. Bethesda went to unreasonable lengths to ensure players wouldn't be locked out of being able to push that button. Why? Because blowing up Megaton is one of the centerpieces of the game. So whether someone hates Fallout 3, loves Fallout 3, or anywhere in between, they always think of this quest in particular because that's where Bethesda put their focus. They sure as hell didn't put the focus on great writing. They put it on this. The exact same people that took the time to set up an elaborate Rube Goldberg machine in Gold Ribbon Grocers, just so players can push that button.
When you have finished savoring the moment, you may have the honor of pressing the button. Oh, and mind your eyes, it'll be brighter than bright. The detonator is right over there. You may have the honor. Hit the switch.
And feel some cheap satisfaction, just like Peggle.
My favorite sort of ego-stroking design to make you feel great moment in any game is Peggle. Have you, everybody here played Peggle? Have you finished a level? If you haven't, all levels end this way. I'm pretty great. I think I'll play another level.
Display of fireworks. I almost wish there was another nuke we could detonate. You don't see that very often.
I'm glad you're pleased. I had help, of course.
Quite right.
Power of the Atom as a reminder is a quest about dealing with the unexploded bomb at the core of Megaton.
Yeah, it's funny how Deputy Weld outside of the town mentions the bomb before you even know about it. And then, the moment you enter the town, Lucas Sims tells you about it. And some shady-looking guy in the town's bar motions you over and wants you to blow it up. So many people are obsessed with this bomb and want it either detonated or disarmed. But in the course of 200 years, no one could do anything until some kid wandered out of a vault in search of his father. Everything about the quest comes across as absurdly contrived.
The sheriff wants it disarmed for good, and Mr. Burke, acting on behalf of Mr. Tenpenny, wants it blown up, wiping Megaton off the map.
You may be surprised to know that there are actually people in Megaton that agree with Burke and want the bomb to be detonated and for their own town to be wiped off the map, even though it would cost these people their lives. They actually want this to happen. I'm talking about the religious nut jobs that live in Megaton, aka the children of Adam. Earlier in your video, you boasted about how you knew where all the characters in Megaton lived.
I'm pretty sure I know where everybody lives in Megaton.
But you clearly never considered them to be worthy of your time to talk to and hear what they had to say. You made up your own incorrect theory on the creation of the Megaton crater when Manya tells you the canonical story. You claim this game is better than you think, but how can that be the case when you won't even talk to these people in the game? Confessor Cromwell explains the basic premise of his religion if you ever took the time to listen. He believes that the splitting of atoms that takes place during nuclear fission is not an act of destruction, but of creation. He believes trillions of new atoms and universes are created when an atomic bomb is detonated.
Children of Atom is based on the idea that each single atomic mass in all of creation contains within it an entire universe. When that atomic mass is split, a single universe divides and becomes two, thus signifying the single greatest act of Atom's creation. Occasionally, a divine event occurs, and trillions upon trillions of new universes are created. The last such event took place here 200 years ago. Where most of the lost children of Atom see that event as simple war and devastation, we see creation and unification in Atom's glow.
There is, of course, no scientific validity behind this. New atoms are not created during nuclear fission, but rather the nucleus of an atom is split into smaller nuclei. Nothing new is created, just a division of what was already there to begin with, and a massive release of energy. This is what causes the destruction of an atomic bomb. The word atom comes from the Greek word atomos, which means unable to be cut. The ancient Greeks didn't have the instruments to observe atoms, but they came up with the philosophical concept for an atom as being the smallest particle you could cut something down to, at which point it could not be cut any further, and therefore atomos. By the way, the etymology of the name Caesar, or Kaiser, comes from a Latin word which means to cut. This name may have been given to Julius Caesar, referring to the fact that he was born via a cesarean section, which involved the cutting open of his mother's belly. This method obviously involves cutting, so therefore the name of Julius Caesar was very apt. I'm sure this is only a coincidence, and there's no deep hidden meaning behind it, and I'm probably the only one in the world that ever noticed this, but in the Fallout franchise, on one hand, you have this guy with a Latin name which means to cut, and the franchise as a whole involves atom bombs and such, which comes from a Greek word which means unable to be cut. But we now know that atoms indeed can be cut, or at least split, via fission, and atoms themselves are made from even smaller subatomic particles. The smallest known subatomic particles are electrons, leptons, bosons, and quarks, as well as their associated antiparticles. If Confessor Cromwell's claims are correct that entire universes reside inside of atoms, it would have to be within these subatomic particles somehow. But the subatomic particles are not in any way affected by nuclear fission, which splits the nuclei of atoms, but does not split the smaller elementary particles which make up the atoms. I don't think there's any known method to do that, but this is set in the future and in an alternate timeline, so who knows? Long story short, I don't believe that the premise behind his religion is correct. But even if it were, he's still a suicidal idiot who would gain nothing other than dying pointlessly in a nuclear explosion. What does it matter, even if new universes are created, if you yourself are dead and for no gain whatsoever? This strange suicidal cult reminds me of the real-life Heaven's Gate cult, which committed mass suicide in 1997 on a date coinciding with the approach of the Hale-Bopp comet. They believed that there was an extraterrestrial spaceship flying behind that comet, and by committing suicide on that date, they would be teleported into it. But Heaven's Gate isn't the only example of a cult of suicidal nutjobs. There was Jonestown back in the 1970s, where people drank poisoned Kool-Aid. And so if you ever hear someone talk about drinking Kool-Aid, it refers to the Jonestown cult, and basically means being a sheep and blindly doing what you're told, even if it results in your death. And that's what is going on here with the children of Adam. They may not be drinking the Kool-Aid, but they're drinking highly irradiated water, which they probably consider to be holy water or something. I don't know. There's even a sign pointing to their church which explicitly says, "Local Cult." Whoever placed that sign clearly has a dim but accurate view of this church. It was probably Lucas Sims who had that sign put up. Sims is the secular leader of the town. While a large number of people in the town are members of the church, And I do believe the church formed the main basis for the town's existence. There are also a large number of non-believers as well. These non-believers, like Lucas Sims, are fearful of the bomb and make it very clear they want it disarmed. And the Lone Wanderer is rewarded handsomely by them if they do disarm it. But the members of the Church of Adam cult do not want the bomb to be disarmed, and they make this explicitly clear if you take a moment to talk to them. Mother Maya, who is not to be confused with Manya, whom you also never bothered to talk to, condemns Lucas Sims for his blasphemy of wanting the bomb to be disarmed.
Lucas wants someone to disarm our bomb? Imagine the blasphemy. I can't believe it. I mean, I don't believe it. He would never do that to us.
There is also a terminal inside of the church which you can hack, and there you will find entries welcoming the bomb exploding. Confessor Cromwell is considered a good karma character, and you receive karma by donating money to his church. But if you do what he wants and detonate the bomb, you lose a massive amount of karma. A random event of angry Megaton survivors can randomly come after you. You get blasted on the radio by Three Dog, and Liam Neeson says he's disappointed in you. But you were doing what the cult wants to happen. The morality of this quest is discussed often, but very rarely do these conversations take into account the fact the church wants the bomb to be detonated. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If there is anyone in Megaton which ought to have the technical know-how to disarm the bomb, it would have to be Moira Brown. Though she comes across as a naive fool in many ways, she must also be incredibly intelligent in others. She is able to run a business, write a survival guide, perform repairs, and even invent things. She is a prime example of an idiot savant, not unlike Albert Einstein, who was obviously intelligent in some ways, but his teachers thought he was mentally challenged and would never amount to anything. Moira is a lot like that. With her apparent technical know-how, she should be able to perform the trivial task of disarming the bomb, but she doesn't want to.
Oh, I couldn't do that. It'd be a real blow to those nice folks in the church. Besides, it's not like that bomb ever hurt anyone. Live and let live, right? Yeah, they really are, aren't they? And I guess this is what the Ascension mumbo-jumbo Atom cultists wanted too. So, nice of you to help them like that, I guess.
Moira understands that the children of Adam do not want the bomb to be disarmed, and she respects their wishes. Another character in the town who one would expect to have the technical expertise to disarm the bomb would be Walter, who maintains the town's water purifier. But, unlike Moira, he makes it clear that he isn't happy with the constant threat of the atomic bomb looming over him.
What can I tell you about Megaton? Well, that fucking bomb is killing us all slowly. How's that for a piece of information?
So why doesn't he disarm the bomb? Why doesn't anyone? Only the player character is capable of doing anything.
Many people dislike this as it's one of those uniquely computer gamey moral choices, where the bad option is such supervillain level evil that it becomes slightly ridiculous. As a result, I've seen it be asked many times, why would any character have any reason to blow up the bomb?
Well, one reason would be because, as I previously explained, it is what the children of Adam want. You could compare the moral dilemma of this quest with the quest involving Harold, where Harold wants the player to kill him. Harold wants to be killed, and if the player obliges his request, the game doesn't judge the player for having committed an evil deed. Why is obliging the wishes of the children of Adam considered any different? Yes, there are non-believers in Megaton, and the bomb exploding kills them as well, so that much is objectively evil, but one could make the argument that they deserve to die themselves from a Darwinian perspective. These people are so stupid in choosing to live around a bomb, so isn't it doing the human gene pool a favor by eliminating them from it? Alistair Tenpenny himself makes this exact argument to justify his actions.
Oh no, I'm certainly rather sore about all of that, but certain sacrifices must be made. Besides, Burke assured me that bomb was quite unstable. I asked Burke to suggest they vacate. It was all a matter of time. Think of it as helping speed along the process of natural selection. Don't lose any sleep over it.
While Tenpenny never gives an adequate explanation for why he wants the town destroyed, surprisingly, he says he is sore about the fact that people would be killed, and he suggests to Burke that the people should vacate. The fact that they don't, he cites as proof these people are deserving of their Darwin Awards. So, even the game itself acknowledges the stupidity of the people of Megaton choosing to live where they do instead of literally anywhere else. Whether the quest is morally wrong or not depends on your views regarding Darwinism and eugenics. If I were trying to make the case that Fallout 3 is better than you think, then this is the rationale I would try to use to defend this quest, but the game doesn't allow any room for moral interpretation anyway, because it is the arbiter of what is right and wrong in no uncertain terms, and the game decrees this to be a very evil action. Most people would agree with that, but one that believes in Darwinism and eugenics, or the people that share the religious views of the children of Adam, do not consider this act to be evil, but the game doesn't allow any room for interpretation. Nor is it ever explained exactly what Tenpenny gains from it. He goes to extraordinary lengths just for a 10-second display of fireworks, and that's about it. It's not like there's any shortage of free real estate throughout the wasteland, so this tiny speck in the distance shouldn't be any obstacle to his burgeoning ambitions, whatever that might be. One takeaway you get from Alistair Tenpenny is that he's a businessman and wants to make money. But the way you make money is by having customers. Mr. House understood this. This is the reason why House does not want to wipe the NCR off the map, even if he were in a position where he could achieve that. House views the NCR as a nation of customers who bring caps to his casinos and fuel his ambition to rebuild humanity and head out into the stars. In contrast, Alistair Tenpenny wants to blow up his potential customers. You see trading caravans outside of Megaton all the time. It is a hub where caravans trade and resupply. By blowing up Megaton, Tenpenny is blowing up a major part of the trade network, which not only eliminates a potential trading partner, but also damages the trade network as a whole. This would make it harder for people in Tenpenny Tower and Tenpenny himself to receive trade goods from these caravans. The only logical explanation I can offer for Tenpenny and his insanity is that he may suffer from dementia. Not unlike the madness of Roy Phillips, but whereas Roy is losing his grip on reality due to the process of ghoulification, Tenpenny is losing his grip on reality due to his advanced age.
Why attack Sander? Why? Oh, you're getting nervous, man. Just calm down. It's okay.
If it were up to me, I would have overhauled this quest to allow for a path where you could convince the residents of Tenpenny Tower that Alistair Tenpenny is insane, which he is. And then there would be the option of deciding who the next leader of the tower should be, perhaps even the player themselves. I think reworking the quest to allow for this would have added a lot to the game, as well as make things more sensible, but as it stands, there's no possibility for a good outcome for this tower, or the people in it, or the people that want to get into it.
Well, if you examine the mechanics of the quest, it makes a bit more sense. The good solution normally pays 100 caps, 500 with a fairly hard speech check for a low-level character, whereas the evil option pays 500 caps by default, up to 1,000 with a skill check, or the much easier Black Widow perk option.
But then you also miss out on all the quests Megaton offers, which themselves provide their own caps, and XP, which by the way is the real currency of an RPG. Unless you complete these quests up first and then decide to blow up Megaton after you farmed everything worthwhile out of it. But by the time you get to that point, the difference in caps reward will be pretty much irrelevant, because by then caps and your need for them will be pretty much also irrelevant, because in the course of playing you'll be swimming in so many caps and loot and caps you make from selling loot that you won't care about the difference of only 500 caps. Yes, it's true caps are a bit harder to come by in Fallout 3 compared to New Vegas, because there's no casinos or Sierra Madre gold bars, but this is somewhat compensated by the fact there's also a lot less to spend those caps on in Fallout 3. There's fewer items to buy. Hell, you yourself criticized New Vegas for having so many unique weapons in the hands of merchants instead of in dungeons.
New Vegas didn't like leaving those in caves or ruins for a diligent explorer to find. Often, they were quest rewards bought for shops or otherwise held by named characters. Would you believe I actually did the maths on this? In New Vegas, there are 20 unique weapon variants found out in the wild, the ones on screen right now. But another 16 are held by named characters, available in shops or quest rewards. And that's completely ignoring the Gunrunner's arsenal guns, all of which go straight into shops. Fallout 3 is happy to scatter its rewards across the map, while New Vegas concentrates its rewards in towns and in the hands of important NPCs.
You slam New Vegas for having less loot in dungeons, but Fallout 3 having so much of its loot in dungeons means players get that loot for free and thus don't need to buy it. So there's less need for caps in Fallout 3 because the game gives you everything you need in great abundance just by looking in containers. You never get that post-apocalyptic feeling of scarcity in Fallout 3, which a post-apocalyptic game should have. This is also true in New Vegas, by the way. The amount of guns, energy weapons, ammo, chems, and so on is just ridiculous. I always play on the maximum difficulty, but I never feel myself lacking in the essentials. If I run low on ammo for one type of weapon, I just simply switch to a different weapon that uses another type of ammo, or a melee weapon which doesn't use ammo at all. And you can also heal yourself for free by sleeping in a bed or drinking from a water source. Fallout 3 doesn't have a hardcore mode, so a lot of the things you might have to pay a doctor for in New Vegas you can just get for free by sleeping in a bed. And you also don't have to eat or drink. Not that either is hard to come by in New Vegas either, mind you. But my point is the difference in caps just doesn't really matter a whole lot. It only matters literally right at the start, but even then, it's not like Megaton and Tenpenny are right next to one another. To get to Tenpenny, you have to traverse a huge distance, whereas disarming the bomb in Megaton can be done in an instant, and you can get your caps right away at the start of the game when they are needed the most. The choices are not balanced at all. Even from a purely mechanical standpoint, 500 caps in the hand is worth 1,000 caps in the bush.
Both options have a reward of player housing too, but you might well have a preference for the Tenpenny suite, as it is much cleaner.
Cleaner is irrelevant. You're not Mr. House.
No! Ruined everything! Exposed! Germs! A year of life! If at most!
So a few germs won't kill you. That's why you can
literally
drink from a toilet and it won't kill you. In fact, drinking from a toilet is what the ethos of a post-apocalyptic game ought to be. Bethesda even seemed to understand that somewhat by naming the player character Lone Wanderer. You're supposed to be the Lone Wanderer, not the posh settle-downer. While it may be nice to live in comfort and luxury, that goes directly against the ethos of a post-apocalyptic game. You should be forced to drink from a toilet in order to survive. You should be sleeping in rubble and wake up feeling sore and hungry. You should not have a bed or a robotic butler waiting on you hand and foot. Even the Megaton house is far too luxurious for what a post-apocalyptic game should be.
And I'm utterly baffled that managed to make it into the final game, because we don't need any of it.
Far too many people all over the capital wasteland are living in excessive comfort and luxury. Not just the lone wanderer, or the entire inhabitants of Tenpenny Tower, but also people like Dukov, Eulogy Jones, Sierra Petrovita, and countless others. There are some downtrodden people, to be sure, the 4 or so water beggars who are forbidden to enter the towns, the people that get enslaved, and of course the ghouls. But these seem to be more the exception than the rule. Even the raiders live in luxury, as we can see at Evergreen Mills. Everyone in the Capital Wasteland loves to party all the time in luxury, and all of this somehow
just works.
And this is Bethesda's vision of a post-apocalyptic world, but it's not realistic at all. I don't want that luxury. I want to give my player home to one of the beggars, like Mickey, who is cruelly forbidden from entering the towns. Why can't I do that? I want to be the paragon of the wastes and allow one of these hobos to be a posh settler, so that I can carry on being the lone wanderer. But the game will not allow that. If you complete the power of Adam in any way, you are forced to become the posh settler. The game continues to call you the lone wanderer, but it becomes an oxymoron. I don't want it. I want it to be a post-apocalyptic wasteland game. God damn it. Stop fucking up the Fallout franchise with this sedentary settlement bullshit.
Like the rest of the game, this is about making it your own experience. We want you to build and decorate and make yourself really a place you want to live in.
Fallout 2 has you living in the Highwayman, which you drive around the map in. New Vegas introduced sleeping bags and campfires so you can sleep under the stars. That is the ethos of a post-apocalyptic wasteland game, and Bethesda just doesn't understand that.
A new home for yourself and your best friend, of course.
And does come with a balcony with a very nice view.
Yes, because Bethesda spared no expense when it came to presentation. Whether it's the presentation of the over-the-top violence and gore of VATS, or the presentation of blowing up a town for no good reason, the balcony and its accompanying view were created for the sole purpose of the presentation of blowing up a town.
There's also a couple of other tweaks that make the quest interesting to do. See, if you side with Megaton, Burke sends a team of assassins to kill you, though they don't actually get sent directly, instead they get added to a deck of random events that can spawn in the wasteland, so you may not necessarily see it in any given playthrough.
So instead of choice and consequence, there's just the random chance that there might be consequence. Great.
The only way to avoid that is to seduce him and convince him not to destroy the town.
So all Mr. Burke needed was to get laid, and this is all it takes to get him to abandon his plot to commit mass murder. If that's the case, why doesn't he just use the 500 caps he is offering as a reward for blowing up the town and just hire a hooker? He happens to be sitting only about 20 feet from one. He can hire Nova several times over. Nova gets paid, Burke gets laid, and everyone in the town gets to live. Seems like this would be a win for everyone. By the way, did you know Mr. Burke owns a house in Megaton? He never uses it, but he owns it. And housing in Megaton is such a problem that many people are forced to live in a shared housing arrangement or are just forbidden from living in the town entirely. Yet, it just so happens that the town conveniently happens to have a spare house on hand despite the huge demand, which then gets rewarded to the player for doing a low-skilled task of disarming an old bomb, just like how in Skyrim the player gets rewarded with a mansion and a butler for killing a dragon. That just makes these games all the more contrived. But on top of the house the player is given as a reward, Mr. Burke also has his own house, which he never uses. Wouldn't it make more sense for Mr. Burke's house to be the reward given to the player? As it stands, there's 2 unused houses in a town with a severe housing shortage. It's just not logical. But then, nothing about this game really is it? So Mr. Burke owns his own house in Megaton, which presumably he had to pay for. With the severe housing crisis the town faces, it probably wasn't cheap. So on top of the reward of 500 or 1,000 caps given to the player just for attaching a MacGuffin to the bomb, which even Burke himself should easily be able to do, he also had to have spent whatever it cost for the house. So between the cost of the house and the reward he's offering, he's invested a lot of caps into this scheme of motioning newcomers over and asking them to do a trivial thing. And who knows how long he's been doing this. He seems to spend all his time in the bar. He has to be buying food and probably also drinks, so this is also adding to his expenses. He could have been sitting there for years, just waiting for someone to finally show up. What a colossal waste of caps, and an even more colossal waste of time. Is Mr. Burke a synth? What sane person would waste so much time and money on something so stupid? It only makes sense in the mind of Todd and Emil.
In addition, you can play along, get the device to blow up the bomb, and then turn it straight over to the sheriff, as double-crossing a side that you've already chosen and potentially even taken money up front from is frequently an option in Fallout 3. Side quests rather nicely very rarely locked you into a side. This forces a confrontation which can lead to the sheriff's death, but that lets you acquire a very useful early game Chinese assault rifle.
The Chinese assault rifle also must be factored into the reward total for not blowing up Megaton. It is one of the best firearms in the game, and to be able to get this early on gives players an enormous advantage. You might also get it from pickpocketing or killing Sims yourself, but it's far easier to just let Burke do it, and there's no downside. But if you kill Sims yourself, the entire town will turn hostile to you. But if you let Burke do it, you can loot his body, and the town will not turn hostile to you. The town also will not turn hostile to Burke either, which is strange. Why does the town care so much if you kill their sheriff and mayor, but they don't care at all if Burke does it? Someone explain that to me. But this Chinese assault rifle itself, I would say, easily more than makes up the difference in caps between blowing up the town versus not blowing up the town. You can also kill Burke and loot his body also. Unless you accidentally hit someone else in the process, no one cares that you killed Burke, so you can loot both bodies, then turn the quest into Sim's son, and get the reward from this newly orphaned child who is already over his father's death in the brief time it takes to walk over and talk to him. Kids in the wasteland get over the death of their parents very fast, it seems. Brian Wilkes and Butch are the same way. They pretend to be sad for about 2 seconds, and then they're over it like the flipping of a switch.
He's dead? I guess I already knew. Besides, I'm too tired to cry anymore.
Why can't sad boy Boone learn to be as apathetic as the people of Fallout 3? He is haunted by the death of his wife and unborn child. But when it comes to the people of a Bethesda game, no fucks are given. Is there really such a thing as a good character in a Bethesda game? All I'm seeing are people that just don't give a fuck.
And you can complete the quest anyways, it can be turned into his son,
who, as I said, is over his death in only a matter of seconds.
Dad used to say... Never mind. Well, with my dad gone, I don't really know. Dad always said that I'd have to learn to watch out for myself one day.
What does Lucas Sims' life matter when no one in the town will flinch when Mr. Burke kills him, and even his own son doesn't care? His life matters as much as Jonas's life matters, which is to say, it doesn't matter at all.
Or the confrontation can lead to Burke's death, getting you the first silenced weapon of the game.
Wrong. The first silenced weapon of the game is the BB gun your dad gives you at your 10th birthday, which you are then forced to use to kill a radroach, regardless whether you want to play as a pacifist or not. That's the first silenced weapon of the game. Mind you, it's not a great silenced weapon, but it's definitely the first. And also, most melee and unarmed weapons are also silent, assuming you can sneak up close enough to an enemy. Also, didn't you praise this game for being an open world game? If you genuinely believe that, then you understand that someone could have encountered a silenced 10mm pistol at some point prior to this. But even if they didn't, the BB gun is objectively the first silenced weapon regardless. Fact.
And that also stops Burke ever deploying hitmen against you.
I don't know what amount of caps Burke is paying to hire these hitmen, but you can add that to the ridiculous sum he is willing to pay for this insane venture of blowing up Megaton for no logical reason. Or more likely, this is all Alistair Tenpenny's money, which Burke is squandering. I posit that Tenpenny is suffering from senile dementia due to his advanced age, and Burke is easily manipulating him. Tenpenny might not even care about blowing up the town at all, but instead, maybe Burke has manipulated him into pursuing this. Maybe Burke is the one that wants to see the town destroyed. Burke has a house in the town, as I've explained, so he may have been living there for even longer than he became associated with Tenpenny. Maybe Burke has some long-standing grievance with the town for reasons we don't know. If Bethesda had better writers, they could probably work on that angle and rewrite the quest to make it something closer to making logical sense, but they don't.
So there are some interesting options there, but in short, the evil option awards much more money, which makes it a bit more interesting.
I disagree. What makes blowing up Megaton interesting is the fact you can donate a bunch of water to a hobo and become a paragon of virtue despite having committed mass murder. It's interesting and very amusing to listen to Three Dog praise you as a saint for your good karma, and then, in almost the same breath, berate you as being worse than Hitler because you blew up Megaton. And the idiots that made this game don't see anything wrong or contradictory about allowing the player to be a good karma, mass-murdering paragon of virtue. That's the interesting thing, and which makes the evil outcome worth doing, in my opinion. Otherwise, if it's just about the mechanics of the quest, then I would say just disarm the bomb. It's far less hassle, and you get the caps instantly, and you also get the Chinese assault rifle and silenced pistol. It's just a far better option to go the good route from a mechanical standpoint. The evil route is better for the lulz, but that's the only thing.
Though I do agree with people who say there is basically no reason to detonate the bomb other than role-playing as an evil person.
Or if you want to roleplay as a social Darwinist who believes in weeding out the stupid through natural selection. Or if you want to roleplay as a Children of the Atom cultist or someone who at least sympathizes with their beliefs. Because in detonating the bomb, you are giving them what they want. But even though the game arbitrarily condemns you as an evil person regardless of whatever your reasoning may have been, you aren't permanently locked into being an evil person from this decision anyway. You can donate water to hobos, or donate to churches, or whatever, and work your karma back up to very good. The game allows you to be a very good karma mass murderer, which shouldn't be possible. But the game allows this because the people that made this game are psychopaths who think that donating some crap can compensate for the taking of innocent human life. That's Bethesda logic. I don't agree, but whatever. But all I'm saying is someone could at least attempt to rationalize the decision to nuke the town based on one or both of these two arguments.
I do, however, find that in itself an odd complaint, because one of the most frequently raised issues about Fallout 3 is it's not a proper Fallout game because it's not a role-playing game because there aren't enough choices with consequences.
Well, the fact you can undo the negative karma of mass murder by donations means the mass murder wasn't much of a consequence. And let's face it, the people of this town don't really matter anyway. No one bats an eye when Burke kills Lucas Sims, and even his son is over it pretty fast. And everyone else in the town is either really shady and corrupt, like Jericho and Moriarty, or Leo Stahl with his drug addiction, or are crazy cultists with insane suicidal beliefs or are just plain crazy in general. The fact that you yourself never took the time to talk to Manya or Confessor Cromwell or Mother Maya when researching for your video shows how little these characters mattered to you. They don't matter even in the context of their own world, and they also don't matter to people that play Fallout 3 and attempt to praise the game, such as yourself. So really, who cares, man? If their lives mattered at all, then why didn't you talk to them instead of ignoring them?
But right here, you get the option to blow up a major settlement, permanently killing multiple named characters.
Multiple named characters like Manya, Confessor Cromwell, Mother Maya, etc., whom you didn't consider worthy of your time when researching your video. I had to do your own work for you.
Including quest givers.
Just do their quests before blowing up the town, then you have the best of both worlds.
A companion.
Well, let's face it, if you take Jericho out as a companion, he's just going to end up dead anyway, especially if you happen to have broken steel installed and those high-tier enemies start spawning in. Jericho just can't deal with that. But, that being said, unlike every other character in Megaton besides Moira, Jericho can be saved, if you want to save him, by hiring him and having him accompany you as you detonate the bomb. By the way, isn't it funny how Jericho is considered an evil karma character and you need to have evil karma in order to recruit him? Yet he's located in this town, which is supposedly the good karma town. Jericho truly is an evil character because he doesn't care too much about the town's destruction. This is odd because according to the Fallout Wiki, he will turn hostile if you steal items from his house or attack the Brahmin outside of the clinic. Well, by blowing up the entire town, that Brahmin he cared so much about, and all of his worldly possessions have been obliterated, but he doesn't turn hostile. On the surface, he pretends to care about the town, but ultimately doesn't give a shit about anyone. But that's pretty much par for the course when it comes to this game. The game rightly classifies Jericho as evil, but even characters the game classifies as good, like James, react with similar apathy to the deaths of people that they should have empathy for, such as Jonas.
Shops.
There are other shops in the game.
A very hard locked armory.
Just get your lockpick skill to 100 and loot it before blowing up the town then. It's not like skill points are scarce in this game, unlike in New Vegas. It is extremely easy to max out all skills without even really trying.
A unique bobblehead.
Grab the bobblehead before nuking the town.
Player housing.
Each player housing is mutually exclusive with the other. You either get one or the other, and both serve identical purposes. The only difference is the 10-penny suite looks better and you get a balcony, but functionally it is identical to the Megaton house. So, in practical terms, you don't miss out on anything, no matter which you go with. So it isn't really a loss in terms of one or the other. And I've also explained that player housing goes against the ethos of a post-apocalyptic game and makes the term lone wanderer an oxymoron. So I don't consider either form of housing to be appropriate regardless.
And also the only characters in the game who have information that leads to GNR in the main plot.
You can choose to kill them independently of Power of the Atom. Since Bethesda designed this town to be destroyed, they made every character in it disposable, and every character in the town is non-essential and can be killed except for children, which are unkillable for a completely different reason.
And you can choose to kill all of them. And if you do, you just have to live with it and find the main plot by yourself.
True, but there are only a handful of major settlements in the game, and through the course of playing the game organically, players will inevitably find their way to Rivet City or GNR, where they can ask around and get back on the trail without much difficulty.
Literally.
Must you always do this?
The game changes the objective to continue the search for your father, and now you have no quest marker.
Oh no, no quest marker. You've seen H-Bomb's Fallout 3 critique where he discusses at length why the quest marker sucks and is a bad idea, right? It is good to finally have a brief respite from that, and a brief respite from having to find your dad in general. Even people who claim to like Fallout 3 prefer to go do their own thing than find their dad. They will inevitably stumble on him eventually anyway, no matter what. But no one really wants to be looking for him anyway. Don't kid yourself.
You blew up the one person in the world with information, and now you have no information.
I mean, there are Fallout 3 player guides if you're that desperate, or you can consult the wiki. Consulting a guide is what Bethesda forces you to do if you try to play the Steam version of the game on Windows 10. How's that for choice and consequence?
Not even New Vegas was that happy to let you suffer the consequences of bad decisions.
Wrong. New Vegas allows you to screw yourself over in the worst way possible by allowing you to trap yourself in the Sierra Madre vault and thus earning a Darwin Award of your own. Could there possibly be any more extreme form of choice and consequence than this?
The courier, lured by the promise of the Sierra Madre, could not escape. Once inside the vault, the casino did not let go. When the courier finally passed away, the casino created a new hologram to walk with the other ghosts that filled its casino. It was a pre-programmed homage intended for another. It assumed a new meaning in the likeness of the courier, a means of allowing even the dead to begin again.
Get fucked.
If you kill Beagle, he has a journal on his body giving you the exact information he'd tell you. Kill Manny, the information is right there on his terminal.
So what you're saying is that there are multiple solutions to solving quests in New Vegas? Let's not forget that this was something you praised about the Fallout 3 tutorial.
The escape itself has plenty of options too. The Overseer's door can be opened with a lockpick skill, or you can steal the key from his bedroom, or you can threaten to badly hurt a martyr if he doesn't comply and give you access. Beyond that, there's a science shit you can skip if you choose to thoroughly search the rooms as well. Fallout 3's message here is clear: explore thoroughly and you'll find alternative solutions, which again seems to be exactly what people claim that they want out of a Fallout game.
You come across as a hypocrite for shitting on New Vegas for something you praised in Fallout 3. New Vegas allows you to be underhanded and get the information by killing or pickpocketing from Beagle or hacking Manny's terminal. Or you can be honest and honorable and get the information from them without being a deceitful, underhanded rogue. So what you are citing as a flaw of New Vegas is not a flaw at all, and is actually what you praised in Fallout 3 earlier in your video, you hypocrite.
But not Fallout 3 though. If you blow up your only lead, now you're on your own.
If only that were really the case. You're still forced to find your dad to progress the game. You're never treated as an adult or allowed to make your own choices. Blowing up Megaton without getting the lead first makes it slightly harder to find him, but you still have to, and there's no way around that. And it doesn't make it that significantly harder anyway, because Rivet City or GNR are major locations that you'll either find through exploration or one of the various quests that will direct you there anyway, and then the path is easily resumed, so it's not a huge consequence at all. To be fair, killing Beagle or Manny wouldn't be huge consequences either, because all roads lead to Vegas, as they say. For various reasons, the Strip is the one location of the game you aren't going to miss in any normal playthrough, so eventually finding Benny is almost unavoidable. So I wouldn't count this as something for or against either game.
And isn't that exactly the sort of freedom and choice and consequence that people say they want from a Fallout game?
The real freedom would be to never have to find your dad at all.
Isn't do what you want but be ready to live with the consequences exactly the philosophy that made Fallout 1 so loved in the first place?
Fallout 1 treated you as an adult, and it was always your own adventure. If you don't understand that, then you're just as clueless about what Fallout is as Bethesda.
Plus, I think the bomb's interesting thematically as well.
Yes, it's almost as if Fallout 3 is a gamey, post-apocalyptic amusement park that revolves around the fact that a nuclear apocalypse happened centuries ago, and there's nothing more to the world than that. The equivalent to that would be if in our world everything still revolved around the fact the Napoleonic Wars happened 200 years ago, and people still can't get past it, and don't make any real effort to do so.
Weapons of mass destruction come up repeatedly in Fallout 3.
And I don't have any problem with this. What I do have a problem with is that it is only this. Never anything but this. As I explained previously, the word Fallout has multiple meanings, so the title of the series should work on multiple levels. And Obsidian understood this, but Bethesda doesn't. They double down on the Vault Boy and Nuka-Cola gimmicks, but don't comprehend anything beyond that.
In case you missed them, which is fairly easy to do as they're well hidden at the north on the map, in Fort Constantine you can find the launch codes for an intercontinental ballistic missile, which you can attempt to launch, though it does fail. In a nearby satellite array, you can trigger an orbital weapons platform to drop a nuclear payload on the wasteland, and that one does actually trigger. And there's something interesting about these weapons as well.
You mean the fact they still somehow function after 200 years, even though the half-life decay should have long rendered them into duds by now?
By the safe with the launch codes in it, there's a random wastelander who got the safe open before you arrived. He just got shot by a robot before he could use it. And the satellite weapon is being worked on by some random ghoul who's trying to get it operational.
This random ghoul sounds a lot like Raoul.
Meanwhile, Bert wants to blow up Megaton because Tenpenny voiced a slight preference for it.
Or is it the other way around? Maybe Burke manipulated Tenpenny into agreeing to this scheme. If there is any benefit from it for either one of them, the game does a terrible job of showing it. Tenpenny might be investing his caps into this endeavor, but Burke is the one spending his time in the field trying to find some rando to hire to do it. Whether it's Tenpenny's caps or Burke's time, they're both investing into this, and there's nothing demonstrable for either of them to gain from it. It is a microcosm of the main plot of Fallout 3, where the same is true of Colonel Autumn and his obsession with controlling the water purifier. The game never does an adequate job of showing what he has to gain from all of it.
3 nuclear superweapons, all 3 almost falling into the hands of some random wastelander.
Don't forget Nuka grenades and the mini-nukes the game has scattered all over the place.
Now we'll discuss tone in detail later, but for now, let's say Fallout 3 is often grim. The wasteland hasn't recovered from nuclear devastation. The pockets of civilization are fragile and insecure.
Much like my ego.
In Arafu, they're about ready to give up. In Big Town, the people are initially pretty much completely despondent.
I would be too if I lived in this game.
This is a game that dwells on the horror of nuclear apocalypse.
No shit.
And accordingly, at a basic level, I think there's something fundamentally horrifying about the very presence of these operational nuclear weapons.
Not as horrifying as the fact this game somehow got 10 out of 10 for its writing.
America is in ruins, but there's still a few more nukes ready to go off yet.
And there always will be, as long as Todd and Emil are running the show.
Fallout 3's grim world is haunted by its nuclear past, whether that's in the form of radiation that infects every water source in the wasteland, old Voltec experiments into the forced evolutionary virus that's now running rampant, or the surviving weapons that can threaten what little progress has been made, a theme powerful enough that New Vegas would revisit it in Lonesome Road. If Fallout 3 has a thesis,
If Fallout 3 has a thesis, it is this.
Who's laughing now?
I wouldn't try to ascribe any deeper meaning to a game that was clearly designed by man-children that think violence is funny, in their own words. I mean, you can try, but you'll look like a fool for taking this game far more seriously than its own creators obviously did.
It's perhaps a warning against clinging to the past, repeating old mistakes, replaying old conflicts.
Recycling old ideas, like Bethesda did from the original Fallouts?
It's a thing that New Vegas would pick up too.
I could believe that if Goodsprings were built around an undetonated atomic bomb. then you would have a point. There actually is an undetonated bomb in New Vegas, which uses the same art asset as the megaton bomb, but it is in a remote corner of the map, and it requires Wild Wasteland to be enabled for it to even appear at all. The fact that Josh Sawyer and company sequestered this behind the Wild Wasteland trait suggests they probably held a dim view of this bomb in megaton, as any sane person would. Of course, they have to keep things professional, and they can't really say that, but I have no doubt they weren't impressed by it. And the fact they hid this bomb behind Wild Wasteland, which implies they considered it to be silly and not worthy of inclusion in a serious game, gives a solid clue as to what they thought about it when it was in Fallout 3. There is no equivalent to the power of the atom in Fallout 3. The closest thing to it would probably be the fact that you can side with the Powder Gangers to take over Goodsprings and kill the inhabitants. I would consider this probably one of the closest things to a black and white, objectively evil decision in New Vegas. It isn't something I would do, but at least it is just a bad outcome, and not an absurdly stupid and over-the-top outcome. Blowing up Megaton is not only a bad outcome, it is also a stupid one, because it makes no logical sense. At least there is some logic to why the Powder Gangers would want to take over Goodsprings, but Tenpenny only wants to blow up Megaton because of the pretty fireworks.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they? And I guess this is what the Ascension mumbo-jumbo atom cultists wanted too. So, nice of you to help them like that, I guess.
The stupidest things in New Vegas are sequestered behind the Wild Wasteland trait, which you have to opt into to see. In contrast, the stupidity of Fallout 3, which is a very large portion of the game, is put on display front and center, and you cannot avoid it. Not just the Megaton bomb, but the other stupid stuff, like the LARPing antagonizer and mechanist, Gary, Little Lamplight, and that annoying kid you have to escort, and so on. All of this stuff should be hidden behind Wild Wasteland and optional, so that people who want a serious game don't have to deal with it. But of course, the man-child who says violence is funny is not going to understand this.
Probably best summarised by the expression old world blues. To quote that DLC, it refers to those so obsessed with the past that they can't see the present, much less the future, for what it is.
But it is the past which defines what the present is. In order to understand the present, it is necessary to understand the past, and all of the events that led to the present. As Ulysses pointed out,
"Who are you that do not know your history?"
In the intro narration of the first Fallout, Ron Perlman cites examples throughout history, such as Hitler, when he explains that war never changes. You probably dismiss that intro narration as being
a massive exposition dump. That is pure telling, not showing. And I'm utterly baffled that managed to make it into the final game, because we don't need any of it.
But it is important to learn these examples from history. There is a famous quote which says, "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it."
And that's an idea that keeps coming up in the main antagonist of Fallout 3. President Eden wants to wipe the slate clean of anything post-war, no matter how many casualties it would cause.
President Eden also explodes when you say one line to him.
Braun wants to recreate the old world, even if it means living the rest of his life in a simulation.
Braun doesn't want to recreate the old world. He only wants to torture people because he's a cruel sadist. Period. The worst torment that can be inflicted on him is to leave him alive in this simulation, but with no one else in there for him to torment.
Do you realize what you've done? You've triggered the failsafe, ruined everything. The subjects will die and I'll be stuck here in this hell alone.
You ruined everything! Everything!
Braun doesn't care about running a simulation with fake holograms or whatever. He wants real humans to torture. I don't think he even cares about the setting. He could probably torture someone in an ancient Roman or a science fiction setting, and he would be just as happy. It doesn't have to be the old world. He just wants to hurt people. Just like the guy who made Fallout 3. The guy who thinks violence is funny. Kinda makes you wonder.
The Overseer is so scared of any change that he'd rather gun down his own people than allow dissent.
The Overseer believes people leaving the vault poses an existential threat to the entire vault. That's why.
No one ever enters, and no one ever leaves.
And his rationale is explained in the entries on his terminal and through dialogue. If you want to argue he's a tyrant, fair enough, he is, but I think it's a stretch to argue that he's trying to cling to the old world. The vault is its own world unto itself. The old world that created the vault no longer exists, and the outside world that exists now is completely alien.
And there, right there, in the middle of the very first town, is the most literal representation imaginable of being haunted by the past.
The most literal representation of being literally haunted by the literal past is Booney Boy in New Vegas being literally haunted by his literal past.
An atom bomb. Sorry, that was quite a big digression for one quest.
Oh, say nothing of it. There's no one in all the world who is more guilty of digression than yours truly.